want to welcome everybody today. My name is Richard Teasdale. I am the moderator of this panel. I've been editing video for about 10 years. I worked on, edited 3 shorts. Evening with My Comatose Mother, Kiss the Devil in the Dark, and Creatures of Whitechapel. If you want to go check those out, I don't know where you can see them, but go ahead. Also, I am the Deputy Director of FilmQuest, which is a genre film festival that we have here in Provo. And yeah, I think that's enough for me. Let's go down the line and have everybody introduce themselves.
I'm Scott Taylor, local author, screenwriter, convention goer, panelist person, and movie lover.
Awesome. I'm Dan Wells. I write books. I've worked in film. I've written for TV. I wrote and produced a stage play. So I write a lot of things.
I'm Garrett. I'm also a novelist and big-time movie fan. I've been trying to parlay my strange childhood into cult into fame and fortune. Hasn't worked yet. One day.
It's going to pay off eventually.
One of these days. Get something out of it. Books basically saved me from a terrible childhood.
And I'm Scott Parkin, author, critic, publisher, podcast co-host, and all-around blowhard.
Well, it should be a good panel. So, as far as, I guess, I just kind of want to open it up to you guys at some point here, but Phil K. Dick was pretty influential on me as a fan over my life. Blade Runner is like my favorite movie. So, maybe we should start off by just kind of wondering what it is that maybe you guys appreciate about Phil K. Dick and his stories.
Can I start?
Let's start.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
He did the drugs, so I don't have to. No, for real, I was reviewing his bio. It's concerning, right? But we can't set aside the effect that those things had on his imagination. I was also listening to on Audible a lot of his short stories and work. It's wildly inventive, just out there, and there's no way you can discount the effective chemical alterations on the mind. So he's sparked my imagination since I was very little.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. How many people here consider themselves fans of Philip K. Dick? Right, so I can safely say, and you understand what I'm saying, you're all dickheads.
Proudly, yes.
They call themselves. Okay, good. So, he was a schizophrenic. He was also paranoid, had a bunch of other things, chemically depressed, and whatnot else. He was mentally disorganized in ways that I think is exactly like you say. He had an honestly different view of the world. He never could be sure if what he was seeing was real or not. And that informed, right, some of his most popular works, like we can remember For You Wholesale. Total Recall.
Yeah,
Total Recall, thank you, sorry. I'm a fan of the writing more than the movies, but I love movies too. And that whole question, what is real, what is not? Are you a replicant? How would you know? Does it matter? And that whole fundamental questioning of what is it to be human? What does it mean? Who is more human, the organic humans or the adopted humans? And these are such fundamental, basic questions that science fiction has spent its entire history struggling with, that I think he really is kind of almost iconic as the guy.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Anytime you start playing with reality, am I real? Is the world around me real? And even when, something like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is all, are these androids real people? Do they count as people? Do they know they're people? But then he also, just for fun, throws in this whole little. There's one chapter where he shows up at the wrong police station and starts questioning his entire reality. And why is that in there? Probably because he did that. You know.
Maybe balance. I mean, this is nonfiction, and it's presented as a novel, but it's really more or less his direct experience.
Yeah. My very favorite Philip K. Dick novel, and actually my favorite movie adaptation of him, is Scanner Darkly, the rotoscope thing. I love that book, and I don't know, like, I wish I had a really pithy answer that I could tell you why I love it so much and what he did to make me love it so much. I don't. And that's part of why I love it so much. My favorite short story of all time is Philip K. Dick. It's Upon the Dull Earth. And there's just something about that one that gets me every time. That final scene where he looks in the mirror and he's turned into the girl that everyone in the whole world is turning into. That's incredibly powerful. And it stems from this version of reality, this disconnect with reality that he lived with. But if that's all it was, it wouldn't matter, and it wouldn't have that impact. His way of presenting it, of making it personal, of making it visual, to go ahead and quote the name of the thing. Like I remember when I first read the short story Paycheck, and I thought, this needs to be a movie right now. And then they made one and it was terrible. And I'm like, how can you screw up the best movie pitch I've ever heard in my life?
Yeah.
And he just had a way of writing something that lent itself to visual medium so clearly.
Maybe because you can see it itself.
I guess.
Well,
with his actual eyes.
and to build on those comments, one thing that not only did he not know what was real, he also, I think, came to the grips that there was maybe no way of ever finding out if you could figure it out. Because with stories, you have the person, they go through the arc, and then at the end they resolve. It's resolved. You find out what's going on. But if you are going into this knowing that there may not be ever a resolution, that changes. We're just not programmed to think that way. And one of my personal is Man in the High Castle, the book. I came to this late, to that book late in my research, but I just love the fact that the alternative reality of the wars ending the way it did. It was just such a natural. And he didn't have to go through some of the world building because we already understood the world. We understood this is how things would be if California is Japanese ruled and the East Coast is German ruled. I mean, it's such a simple thing. It's like, why didn't anyone ever do that before?
The adaptation for that is stellar.
The Amazon list.
Yeah, it's stellar. My wife and I are obsessed with that show.
Well, hopefully they're understanding more what they have to work with to begin with, so they can make it crappy.
Yeah, they should. Well,
I've only seen the first season of that show, but
Second season is great.
Fantastic.
So what would you guys say? Like, one thing I found interesting about his characters are that they're kind of like everyday guys a lot of the time. They're just people, and they wake up one day and they're super paranoid and they're on the run and things are not the world is not what they thought it was. Why do you think that that's such an important theme?
It feels too easy to say that comes from paranoid schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
And I have family members with paranoid schizophrenia, and I know that is a reality that they deal with. Where, I wrote a whole book about schizophrenia. I've interviewed people who actually think that they, Joe Normal, who's just trying to live, is being spied on by the government and aliens and all these other things, and that's a reality that they live with. But like I said, it feels too easy to just say, well, that's why Philip K. Dick did this.
Yeah, because there's something that profound comes out of that in those stories usually.
Yeah, there's a level of self-awareness. He was variably connected enough to understand that it was worthwhile to keep asking the question, not to give in to either what we would call reality or what he perceived.
Right.
Because neither one of them was reliable in his experience.
Yeah.
And I think, because he saw himself as an ordinary guy, which anyone who's known him couldn't possibly believe. Tim Powers kind of was his, grew up with him, and tells stories about things they did, and Phil just kind of twanging over there, and he had a. It's hard to put into words, right? There was a resonance in his personality. It was a reality that was so full of humor and life and love that you couldn't, because if you just said, well, let's be clever and talk about what's real and what's not, flat idea, who cares? Everyone's done it.
Right.
But Dick brought the true humanity of that question in with characters, right? Deckard in Blade Runner / Android Stream of Electric Sheep. If you read the short story from We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, I still can't remember.
I can't remember.
I hated both versions.
Oh, so it's Quaid, I think, in the movie, but it's
Quaid is the
Quail
character.
in the.
Well, but then he becomes, at the end of the story, he's actually a different name. It's like Jennings or something.
Oh.
And that's the thing, is he takes it one layer deeper in a story that only covers the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Right.
So
Yeah,
his short
right.
story was both deeper and more profound than this Hollywood Schwarzenegger blockbuster, or the sequel version that was a special effects monster. But the humanity in there. Speaking of Through a Scanner Darkly, he wrote a little afterwards of that, a little essay at the end. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah. I don't remember what he said in it.
I literally wept as I was reading it. He says, look, many of the characters in this book are real.
Yes.
I knew them.
Oh, wow.
And he goes and he names them one by one and tells you how they broke down as a result of both organic and chemical enhancement. And he gets to the end and he says, I'm not trying to justify anything. We all knew that what we were doing was wrong. It was illegal. But the price we paid was too much.
Wow.
The clarity to recognize that in himself and his friends and in the nature of humanity. It's just, there's a depth to who he was as a human being that comes through.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I love that book so much, is because it has all of the big sci-fi shenanigans going on. But like the whole first chapter is just his junkie friend in his house, and doing stupid things, and you love him anyway. And it's so intimate and so personal.
It's real.
One of the things that struck me again as I was reviewing the last couple of weeks is that really these main characters are not Tom Cruise, they're not Arnold Schwarzenegger or Colin Farrell, although Colin Farrell's a little closer. They are us, guys, the ladies, the men. They are regular people. I mean, in Minority Report, the main character is some guy who doesn't like his job a whole lot, but he doesn't want this other guy to take his job. It's I think that's one of the reasons they've become accessible for movies, but also he's wildly original. Except for, I've heard complaints that people don't, that the movies don't adhere to the stories. No.
That's actually one thing that I thought was really interesting, and I thought you might want to talk about is the movies go off in their own direction almost every time.
Well, they have to have a resolution.
Yeah.
And most of those books just don't.
That's the thing is his books either don't resolve or they resolve as tragedies.
Yeah, like Minority
Almost
Report.
every time. And Hollywood wants to add, let's make the paycheck guy a super martial artist and give him a happy ending. Like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I thought was interesting is his characters almost trying to think of the best way to put this. His characters recognize the injustices in the system, but ultimately buy into the system, or they're like, yeah, we'll just preserve it, it's fine. And what are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious what you guys have to say about that.
Well, I think anytime you get older, there's a reason that when you get older, you just want to stay home. It's like, do I want to go out and fight the traffic and stay up all night? I'll just stay home and watch a movie. there's a maturity in his work that, and you could say it was chemically induced or influence, which there's no doubt. But it's not only it's rare talent when you can feel these things and then express them. Because a lot of people have these feelings and thoughts or whatever, but to be able to put it down in words is rare. So I don't know.
that was something that really stuck out to me was, especially in Minority Report, when he, at one point, the main character is like, "This is not okay that we're accusing people of doing things that they haven't done."
Have not yet done.
And then he literally goes out and he murders somebody. Just drastically
Propagates the
different from the
system.
movie. Yeah, you could murder somebody just to preserve the system.
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
And you look at the movie with its 3 endings.
Yeah.
Everybody's okay. No. Everybody's okay.
Yeah.
No. Everybody's okay.
Right. So
That's a really great story. I mean, that got me. Yeah.
Well, and despite speaking of Tom Cruise's single-handed efforts to almost destroy the original story, because he didn't want to be a non-hero, he wanted to become heroic, so he forced him to change it to make him
a better character.
a rollicking hero guy.
Hero
Mission
character.
Impossible 17.
Yes.
And that's too bad because you can't do that. One of the adaptations, there was a movie done of Valis, which is really intriguing because if you've read the book, I could possibly adapt this thing. It was clearly labor of love by some very, very devoted fans, clearly done on a very low budget. And while it missed on so many of the details, it's one of the few films that I think, like Scanner Darkly, captured the soul of who he was and what he was trying to get at. I think so do you guys know, he's either the most adapted author in history.
What I keep
second
hearing
most
is
adapted.
second most.
So,
Behind
I've
Stephen
heard
King.
that.
Behind Stephen King.
Yeah.
That's what the.
I wasn't sure if that was accurate. But
I don't know, because for film, I think that's true.
Yeah.
But if you include the subsidiary, the short stories that went to series, TV, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got a list
Stephen
here.
King's had 3 versions of The
3
Stand.
pages long.
Yeah. King's got a ton of series.
Yeah,
Does he?
Under the Dome was a big one. The Stand it's on its 3rd iteration. It's on its 2nd or 3rd iteration.
He's involved with, what is it, Castle Rock or whatever?
Castle Rock, yes.
Oh,
that
yeah.
takes,
Yeah.
That's true.
the cursed city that he's always had listening sequence.
yeah, I can totally believe Stephen King is number one, but I'm not sure. I wasn't sure when I read that on the thing.
Well, and partly because he's both alive and able to negotiate his own
Yeah,
contract.
exactly.
Something about Dick's stuff is that it's so wildly imaginative, so original, and I think that is one of the things that lends itself to these adaptations. But we have to admit and accept that they are adaptations. That they're inspired by that story. They're not really going to tell that story. It's just a different story. Minority Report, Total Recall, they're fundamentally different stories.
Yeah. I remember the first time I read Valis and thinking, every chapter of this book has a brilliant idea that any other author would base an entire novel on.
Right on.
And he's just throwing them out there, as throwaways. And so you can see why people are intrigued and why they want to work with him and adapt him. But you can also kind of understand why they have to eventually back down from it.
Yes.
And say, I can't do everything that's in here.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to do the one thing that intrigues me the most. I actually think the first Blade Runner, while it does not follow Electric Sheep exactly, it's a pretty faithful adaptation spiritually in a lot of ways, because I'm intrigued by this one aspect of your book. I'm going to drill in on it.
It asks those questions just, I think, in the same way.
And it did allow, at least in some of the 15 different versions,
Right.
it did allow for a tragic unresolved ending.
I was going to say, I think it was about the 6th director's cut where they finally put the unicorn back in.
Yeah.
And we realized that the only place he had ever seen the unicorn was in his own dreams. So for this guy, external to him, to do the little unicorn thing, beg the question in a way that could not be ignored
It's interesting.
and also could not be resolved.
In the book, there's this whole thing about animals
Yeah.
being a big part of people's lives.
Sheep was really
That's
important.
not in the
They've
movie
never
at all,
done it
but
in any of the adaptations.
Yeah,
It's
but
such a neat thing.
the movie kind of, there's still little allusions to some of those things in the movie.
And he tosses out this idea of kibble,
Yes.
which is kind of the grainy residue of things long gone, but still littering the earth. Now, if you think about it that physically, you think about that spiritually, you think about that, it's the inevitable evidence of entropy. And you talk about an idea that you could write an entire series of novels on. My heavens. And he threw it away as kind of a clever observation while this guy's driving in a car on his way to pick up a damaged dog that turned out to be real.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about, we're kind of moving into the subject a little bit more, as far as it being, how he translates to film very well to movie adaptations, and what is it that you think makes him so adaptable? We kind of touched a little bit, Dan touched on it, or I'm sorry,
Jared, yeah.
Jared did touch on it a little bit. Well, maybe let's get everyone else's thoughts.
Can I offer a thought real fast?
Yeah, go ahead.
Shut up for the next 10 minutes.
You're just fine.
I think we've had a really interesting observation right down the road here, because when you actually read his stuff, it's fairly light on detail,
Yeah, hardly any sensory detail.
heavy on idea, and he, more than any other author I have ever read, leaves it to you to fill in the details in a way that has to be vivid, has to be powerful, because what he wrote, for example, picking Electric Sheep again, was a decaying world, but nothing like this Japanese cyberpunk future.
Yeah.
Yes, it was like it. No, it wasn't like it. Right? So the vision that this director had, he read the book and said, oh, wow, I can see it. And every individual person, because he wasn't particularly fussed whether you got what was in his head or whether you got it from your own head, because all ideas are worthy of time and effort, be they real or not. He understood that at such an intimate level that nothing he wrote didn't require you to visualize it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes him so successful as a
Just to add on to that, I actually noticed that as I've been reading his books and things, is that he doesn't take a whole it doesn't take a whole lot of time to describe the tech, or little things like the robots, like how their brains work a little better. But it's very vague. It's very, but it's just like there's flying cars. This story could take place Paycheck could take place in modern day without really any problems. But
He does the world build.
The
idea builds, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I hit Minority Report a lot because I just re-listened to it. It was very good. He's got electric cars, he's got the flying cars, he's got the mutants, the genetic mutants, but they're still using tape. So, I mean, obviously the world doesn't matter to him a whole lot. It's the vision of this idea and the people that are inhabiting this idea and living out this idea that mattered much more to him than trying to have some big, interesting, cohesive world. That's actually one of the things I think that makes for great movies and great reading and great listening, in my case, since I do almost all audiobooks, is that it sparks the imagination with this crazy idea, and then you just keep getting these cool ideas, and so your imagination just keeps going. And so that's one of the reasons I think we get these visually spectacular films like Blade Runner and 2049, is that it gets our brains going so well and our imaginations going so well.
And I think also that his name, when these films started, I don't know a lot of people who actually knew that he was behind, or they were based on shorts.
Right.
But I think that through time, his name has now become this is a story from him, and so that will garner. We all hear stories about how hard it is to make anything in Hollywood,
Like original.
to get it back. I mean, all they're doing is making sequels because they know it'll get this much money.
Right.
So to do something different is a risk, but I'm hoping that his name is at least to the point where someone would say, we want to do this project, it's Philip K. Dick from this story, and that would be enough to maybe get it made where it wouldn't be made a few years ago. But yeah, I mean, because the creativity is obviously there, it's always been there.
I think one of the things that, and Jared touched on this a little, that makes him so perfect for visual medium is that his bizarre ideas are all very specifically recontextualizations of the world we all live in and are familiar with, right? He will occasionally have people in space, but, you know, even on the moon colony, they're still playing with Perky Pat dolls, you know? When we have something like the Adjustment Bureau, which is, let's see the weird, you know, people who are managing our world and who are creating our reality. But it is our reality, and so it's very easy in every one of his stories to read. You're not just reading a cool idea, you're reading a cool idea that makes you think about your own life differently.
Right.
Every single time. And he focuses on that more so than any other science fiction author, I think. And so, first of all, the budget's less, right? I mean, not in every case, because you can blow something like Blade Runner or Total Recall way out if you want to. But it all comes back to that. This is our world. This is recognizable stuff. This is people using tape. And yet we're going to show it to you in a way you've never seen it before. And that's very appealing to filmmakers. And that's very easy to recreate, and it's very easy to grok as an audience.
And I think the draw for viewers is that he doesn't romanticize these things. They just are what they are.
Yeah.
It's simple. We don't soliloquize, except at the very end of the story,
Right.
and only for our friends.
Right.
It just is. Here's a world stranger than you can possibly imagine, and look how familiar it is.
Well, and even his themes are like in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Like the whole question of whether androids are more human than human. It's there, but it's just there. Like it's not. He doesn't like end on some profound moment, or there's a little moment at the very end where you're kind of like, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe they are just as real as we are, but he doesn't throw it in your face.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, his stories are all about people, not about ideas. They include ideas, but they're just there. And I'm going to casually mention this incredibly bizarre thing while I'm telling you about this person.
Right on.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we should open up to questions to the crowd. Anybody have any questions for the panel? Anything they want to talk about?
So I apologize, I missed a good chunk of it, so I don't know if you guys were talking about
really, really good.
Of course it was.
We answered your question already.
That's what I'm worried about. So it always strikes me as kind of funny because so much of Dick's material is so kind of ultra and very weird, right? That you know so many adaptations have been made of it because it's not really what you would generally consider commercial material. I guess I'm wondering if you guys think that's has that actually been kind of an ironic help, or is there some hindrance there? Do you have any thoughts on that? It's surprising that so many projects have been made, given the
in some cases, so many times, right, for one project.
Yeah.
I think that's been a big part of what we've talked about. You know, he does talk about these. They're accessible because it's real people in a world that's familiar to us, but they're full of these crazy, awesome, wild ideas that anybody could have a different take on. And so somebody gets to do the project for A Scanner Darkly, and somebody else gets to do something else that's based on the same idea or the same story and stuff.
And I think one of the things that happens is because those core ideas are so compelling and so human and so relevant, they stick with you long after the viewing. And that's what a director wants. That's what a producer wants, is for you to remember this piece long after the viewing so that they can sell the next movie.
But also, to some of them, to a lot of those guys, they are trying to tell a beautiful
But they
story.
are artists, right? There's one that was made, he wrote a few mainstream books, right? He wrote science fiction and fantasy because it kind of fit easily into the way he perceived the world, not because he was limited to anything otherwise. He wrote a book called Confessions of a Crap Artist that is a glorious character study of a guy who doesn't quite fit in. It's set in the 50s. It's totally mainstream. The French made it into a movie. Now, there's zero surprise. The French made that into a movie, right? Because it's so freaking French from this guy who grew up in the ugly parts of town in L.A.
Is it like an autobiography kind of?
I don't know. I gotta read that. But
That sounds cool.
it's really entertaining. It's called Confessions of a Tramp Artist, both the novel and the movie.
Nice.
And the film.
We have a question right here, right?
I just wanted to say really quick that I think we have to address, at least in my mind, the reality that Blade Runner itself is responsible for a massive percentage of the adaptations he gets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it was a singular vision that no one had seen before, and so now Philip K. Dick's name has a lot of sway in Hollywood because of this very financially successful cultural touchstone that somebody else made using his stuff. And so it's like when people ask, when I sit in on a YA panel, why is YA dystopian so popular? And we could give you all of the psycho reasons, all of the psychological underpinnings, but really the answer is that Hunger Games was super successful and so everyone copied it. And I think that Philip K. Dick, not to lessen his legacy, is kind of riding the wave of Blade Runner. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. The Total Recall sequel was based entirely on the Total Recall movie with virtually no connection to the story.
Right.
The new Blade Runner has virtually no connection to the story. They're all just kind of using Dick as a veneer to give some science fiction cred to their own ideas.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Well, what's really interesting is that he actually worked very closely with the director
Ridley Scott?
on Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So that's part of the thing. He was perfectly content with it, right? For all of we book purists who like to say, "Oh, well, you missed this detailing, you got that wrong, and you conflated these characters, and where were the electric sheep?"
Right.
He liked it a lot. He liked the world that Ridley Scott had created. He really thought it was cool.
I think you might have liked the 2049 too.
Yeah, I feel
I think he might have.
I don't want to speak for
I don't
him,
I love that.
He might have.
but I felt like it had a lot of the right themes. But yeah.
Exactly.
Freaking great.
So go ahead. There's a push right here.
Well, I was just wondering how he was accepted for his writings when he was originally published. I mean, was he looked over, or
He didn't make a lot of money writing sci-fi.
He won a lot of awards,
Yeah.
but he didn't make a ton of money. He lived in a time when nobody really made a lot of money writing, to be fair. And all his short fiction, even today, nobody makes money writing short fiction. So
I've got the collected short fiction of Philip K. Dick. It's 5 volumes, takes up about that much space in a slightly larger than mass market paperback, slightly smaller than traditional. Anyway,
Back at that time, you wrote science fiction to get a paycheck.
you did, and that's why you look.
Yeah.
I've got this list of adaptations, and if you look at the year that these things were written, because it's done in order chronologically, 1953, and there's like 17 things on the list.
Yeah.
Because he was just publishing constantly, because that's what they had to do. It's 6 cents a word or 5 cents a word, 3 cents a word back then.
yeah. Well, and also, he was never rich, but he was also kind of financing by himself his whole little commune of druggy friends. And so he probably would have been rich if he didn't have 20 freeloaders. But, they were his very close friends and he was happy to do it.
Well, same thing, right? Tim Powers, who was another just brilliantly visual, memorable writer who drops ideas at the drop of a hat, as it were. They were close friends. He did develop friends. He had true friends and honest friends, and they all talked constantly about this. Sometimes we get so competitive that we don't want to let anything out of the box. Dude, this guy had so much going on that he literally could drop a novel idea as a passing reference. And it didn't matter because there's more where that came from.
That's a really powerful principle too. That we try to. Some of us maybe try to play our ideas or our thoughts close to our chest, but Dick is a great example of a guy who didn't particularly care about constraints, and so he shows us just what the imagination can do and how far it can go. We should remember that as artists. That let's do our best work and let's put a giant challenge in front of ourselves and see if we can develop it. Let's have the stupidest, craziest, funkiest idea possible and see where it takes us, because imagination is powerful. This thing is, we don't understand this thing up there.
And he didn't let himself get scared off by social trends or other things either, right? You look at the 3 stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, back when talking about stigmata in science fiction would have shot you down on both sides of the fence. A, we don't talk about religious things in fantastic books. B, imagery. B, science fiction writers do not countenance the fantastistical. Well, guess what? He had mutants. He had...
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Right, precogs in many of his stories.
Yes. Yeah, the whole thing about religion in Electric Sheep is really interesting, because they discredit the religion and then but he still has Deckard still has religious experiences.
There's still a religion.
That's what's going on. So there's some interesting parallels and dualities.
To be fair, a lot of those religious experiences are not what most people would consider religious experiences, right? Like, one of the stigmatas of Palmer Eldritch was an infectious language, if I remember correctly, that you could just catch communally, and then you would all start understanding it. And it's such an incredible idea, and it was just, again, one of the weird things in the book. Not everyone would look at that as a religious thing, and yet that kind of became the foundation for this massive, like, all the Ubik stuff that he wrote. So we keep coming back to, he saw the world differently, but he did. And merely the fact, one of my favorite definitions of genius that I've heard is not that you are smarter than everybody else, but that you see or form connections that nobody else has. And the ability to take something that nobody else would consider religious and say, well, we're going to treat this like it's a religion or a religious experience. That's genius. That's where that comes from, because you were the first person to ever think of it, let alone do it.
And I still think that part of it,
Oh, no, go ahead.
I still think that part of it was his just inherent humanity, because he does not rage. He does not
pontificate.
decry. He does not pontificate.
No.
He is sad that some things happen and wishes that good people didn't have to suffer bad things. But he's not moralizing at you. And the fact that he's not, that he had accepted all of this and yet more. You cannot go into any of these things, be they adaptations of the original works, and not feel just the incredible, accepting, rich, deep love of humanity that he had. And I don't know about anyone else, but dude, I want that so bad.
That's one of the strengths of the Man in the High Castle production, is that you do have villains and stuff, but these are people, and they're out to, in their minds, they're doing the right thing. The one played by Rufus Sewell on the Nazi side is an astonishing character. And just at the end of season 1, my wife and I were screaming at the TV, no, and then no. So that's all I'm going to say. You need to go watch that show. It's some of the best acting, but also the production value is so exceptional in that all Japanese culture is accurate right on.
I think we have a couple of questions. I'll get you in just a while. Did you have a question over here?
No, I was just thinking that you mentioned conventions of a crap artist, and I think he did write that in reaction to being married to his second wife.
Yes, I think there was a little introduction or something.
She kind of wanted him to do something that was more straight fiction, and I don't remember all the details.
And he wrote stuff that was so glorious it would make the absurdists blush. It was wonderful.
It's on Amazon.
That's one off.
It's out there. Read it. It's worth it.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I came early, and as Logan was setting up, he said, "Oh, you're a Philip K. Dick fan?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to be." And we said, "What do you mean by that?" So, well, every adaptation I've seen, I've kind of liked. I mean, Man in the High Castle is fantastic. I thought The Adjustment Bureau was a really fun movie. Yes. But every time I try to read a story or a novel of him, I just come away with what was that? Why did I just spend my time doing that? So I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions of places for people to start. Because obviously, people really like him. They keep making movies out of his stuff.
There's a taste question. Sometimes it's not people's taste.
Yeah.
Audible. A little faster on the reading.
We kind of made fun of Hollywood changing all his stories, but there's a reason that they change all his stories. And so, yes, in terms of suggestions, which one? Like, my favorite ones are not super accessible. Flow My Tears, the Policeman said, don't start with that one. If you have not tried Scanner Darkly, again, I do recommend that one because it is so character focused.
But it's also exceptionally paranoid.
Oh yeah.
But were you reading thinking that they might be similar to what you'd already seen?
No, because I know how it works with adaptations. I mean, Lord of the Rings was a disaster.
Hey, don't bite your tongue.
What?
I'll so a couple years ago, I'm in the bookstore and I see this huge thing, the exegesis. I picked it up and thought, what the crap is this? I put it back and I said, that's it. You know, maybe this guy is not the author for me.
Yeah, well,
obviously I picked up the wrong book.
Man in the High Castle is a good example because I actually don't think it's a great book. It was his first one. It kind of created alternate history, secret history as a genre.
Right.
It won every award we had at the time because it was so new. But reading it, there's no clear story.
Right.
And he actually, the Taoist fortune sticks that everyone in the story uses all the time, that's how he wrote it. Is he would write a chapter and he would get to the end of a sequence and he'd say, well, what happens next? And he'd shake out the fortune sticks and say, oh, well, that's dumb. And he'd write it anyway.
Great writer type.
And you can see that in the fiction because, you get to, there's one character who all of a sudden turns out to be an Italian spy. And you're like, there's nothing in this book that leads towards this. This clearly came out of nowhere. So yeah, a lot of his fiction is kind of a mess. And I do not fault anyone who wants to just glean the ideas through a better storyteller somewhere. At the same time, his storytelling works really well for me. So he might not be for you.
Well, and there's something to be said for going to the source. I mean, it's great to filter, Minority Report through that movie, but, maybe that's not the best place to get those ideas, and maybe you want to see what they actually did to those ideas in the first place. So, I'd like to. I want to believe.
I think there's a if you read We Can Remember That For You Wholesale, that might be a good place to start if you're just starting out. But it's also there's almost a Bill and Ted's moment at the very end, which is kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
Have you read the short story Paycheck?
That's a good read.
Because I think that is arguably his most mainstream accessible while still being brilliant science fiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I happen to also thought that Minority Report was an excellent short story.
I enjoyed it.
But here's the thing: is I have the same experience with Isaac Asimov. Every single thing of his that I've ever read leaves me dead flat. I loved A Fantastic Journey with Raquel Welch.
Raquel Welch, yeah.
You're right. And Donald Pleasance and all that.
Yeah.
I loved that. I read the book and I was left so terribly flat because this guy's prose style just does not engage me. Then again, I read The Gods Themselves and discovered that he could write, man. When he chose to. When he worked really hard at it. And that's kind of the thing. Is my only suggestion is, look, there's somewhere out there, there's the one that will grab you and make the others make sense. And the only way I know how to do it is just slug your way through.
Well, there's something to be said about movie adaptations. Oftentimes out succeed their book sources, because sometimes the source is an interesting idea, or maybe it's a novel story, but then there's plenty of examples out there. But basically they take an idea and they run with it, and they run so far with it that it becomes far better than the actual.
So one comment. The exegesis, do not read it. Do not read it. This was an experience. He literally, if you read Valis, he talks about the flash of pink light and the sudden download.
That happened to him, right?
tremendous amounts of information. That happened, and he wrote it down as that.
Okay.
This is literally a stroke.
Based on like the lens of somebody's glasses or something.
You are reading the changes in his brain as a result of a micro stroke. And it's really, I mean, it's fascinating if you're a fan of the man and want to know who he is. As entertainment, oh heavens no.
So on the plus side, you have less to read than you thought.
Yeah, 3,500 pages of pure wow.
We believe that Lord of the Rings are the 3 greatest movies ever made. Almost. Fairly
sorry.
flawless. But there is no doubt that some of my children are not huge fans of those books. That books and movies are entirely different medium. And
They don't
it's
live in
okay.
his house anymore. But he still invites
Well, I
them
mean,
over for holidays.
they live there. I just don't talk to them. Yeah. Ever.
Upstairs, downstairs.
So I think we need to finish up. We have one last question, or just want to make sure. Go ahead.
In everybody lists their favorite short story by Dick and their favorite novel. I know that Dan already did.
I've already done mine, Scanner
Yeah.
Darkly and Upon the Dull Earth.
I've not read a lot of his shorts, but I like The Man in the High Castle for the conceptions and the big picture.
Yeah.
And I went along with this stuff in the middle. But yeah, so that would be mine.
I'm not a huge novel fan of his, just because it's so heavy and so dense. It's not really my favorite thing. But Minority Report is great, and We Can Remember It For You Wholesale is the most satisfying short story by him that I've read.
I'm going to agree with Dan on the novel. I think Scanner Darkly had some of the most powerful, which is both powerful to me on a spiritual as well as intellectual level. And yeah, for me, probably, I really enjoyed Minority Report. It's a choice. So,
Can I follow that up and ask the panel, since this is ostensibly an adaptation panel, what's your favorite Philip K. Dick adaptation? I'm again going to say Scanner Darkly, because I already said this when I introduced myself. But what's everybody else's? What do you think?
Well, I liked Minority Report. When I first saw that, I didn't realize it was his idea. But what I liked about it is the fact that technology was actually catching up to some of those things. And I mean, how many times do you hear about thought crime and pre-crime in our society, not as science fiction, but as science?
It's one of the only science fiction movies that had an entire team of futurists working on it, and you can see it on every frame.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I haven't seen A Scanner Darkly. It's on my list. Sorry, guys. Back there. Not because it's necessarily faithful in its excellence of execution. The Man in the High Castle is probably right there, but Blade Runner and 2049 really float my boat. Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner that's one of the coolest performances I've ever seen.
and the famous Dick was ad-libbed.
Yeah,
I know, right?
Tears in Rain.
Unbelievable.
That's not in the book.
Well, was it ad-libbed? He wrote it as a
wrote it
speech,
up.
but
Yeah.
it was
never-
Rutger Hauer.
It was
though.
him
It was
in
Rutger
character.
Hauer wrote it, not
Yes.
celebrated it. It's not in the book. There's nothing like it in the book.
Yeah.
I'm going to cheat.
Who's surprised?
You should know that by now. No, for 2 different reasons. I think I hated Blade Runner the first 10 times I watched it.
But you watched it 10 times.
But I watched it 10 times. And on the 11th time I watched it, I realized, oh, I get it now. And that's how I feel about nearly everything that's ever been done from his work, is it requires you to think at a level. But in pure execution, I agree. Scanner Darkly. Here's my one comment. Read the book Scanner Darkly first, through a Scanner Darkly first. Do not read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep if you want to love the movie. And that's my only comment on that.
Okay. Well, thank the panel.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.